The Salmon River has long been known as the River of No Return. It is one of America's premier wilderness river adventures. Salmon River expeditions are usually divided into two trips, the more challenging upper or main salmon and the lower salmon, which puts in here at Hammer Creek near the small town of Whitebird, about 90 miles south of Lewiston, Idaho. Over its 425-mile length, portions of the salmon have been run by jet boat, kayak, raft, and just about every other river craft known to man. But no boats seem better suited to the salmon than Dories. Trip leader Don Litton is a second-generation river doryman. He says that while some people come for a whitewater wilderness adventure, others also come to the salmon for the fishing.
On these trips, ordinarily what we'll be catching is smallmouth bass. What we're fishing for is smallmouth bass. They're real good eating. Steelhead in the steelhead season and salmon also. We have the later season trips, which are specifically for fishing. And those are usually in September and October when it's cooler and the salmon are running. It's a perfect river trip. This particular stretch is perfect for families where they just want to, so to speak, get their feet wet running a river, see what it's like. We've got some fun rapids, nothing as challenging. They're challenging in their own right to a dory, but nothing as challenging as you might see in the Grand Canyon or even on the Snake.
The quiet isolation of the salmon has been disturbed several times in the past by the heavy hand of man.
Mining history represents a good deal of the history of the Salmon River because the Salmon River is fairly famous for its gold, and there's still people who mine for gold in the Salmon River country. In this particular stretch, we'll see a good deal of evidence of hydraulic mining done in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and where they used basically a fire nozzle to blast away sections of the canyon wall where there were river rocks, and then they sluiced out the gold. Most of the hydraulic mining equipment was packed in by mule. And later in the 30s, there were places where there were roads that they could get some of the gear down. Sometimes we'll read stories like someone who sold off a good part of his land to buy a big steam engine to mine with. He'd have a steam engine that ran the hydraulic pump, and then it had a large fire nozzle that shot right into the hillside. A lot of it was done close to the river, so the floods since then have washed away a good deal of equipment, but some of the heavier pieces can be seen by the riverside.
Today, most of the Salmon River corridor is a roadless area. The steep terrain and hard basalt rocks form rapids throughout the journey, and many rapids can be class 3 or 4, depending on water levels. In the past, the salmon was both a highway and a home for the Indians who inhabited this part of Idaho.
The Nez Perce ancestors had lived here for thousands of years. They built pit houses, which we can see along the riverside at one particular spot that we stop at and take a look at what was left behind. They also left behind pictographs. Nobody knows what they mean, but they're there for us to see, painted on the rocks. They used red ochre, painted on with their fingertips or sticks, painted in designs of jagged lines, circles, half circles, some figures of the game that they hunted. Pit house is a depression that's been dug out of the ground and then lined with rocks and soil, and on top of that, short logs could be laid up in kind of a teepee fashion, could be laid up into a cone. And with the advantage of a pit house is that being buried in the ground halfway, as it is, about halfway up the wall is earth, it keeps it a little warmer in the wintertime.
The rapids of the lower salmon rarely reach a class 5 level, partly because the salmon, like the Colorado and the Grand Canyon, is relatively forgiving. Usually, calm pools follow the major rapids.
It's terrific. We have these nice little rapids, riffles, rapids, and we have beautiful calm stretches in between. So for beginning kayakers, people in inflatable kayaks who've never done before. It's perfect. They can come down here and have a good time. And if it gets a little rough for them, they can get out and let somebody else do it. But we have lots of calm stretches, beautiful calm stretches up here too.
Unlike dam-controlled rivers, the salmon is still lined with broad, sandy beaches. The clear, warm water allows people to take advantage of lunch stops in ways not available in most Northwest Whitewater rivers.
Beautiful things about the lower salmon is that the water is just perfect temperature for swimming, and all the playing around in the water that we love to do. I think last trip we had someone with a little thermometer along and it was 76 degrees down here, but this year is a little bit warmer because it's a fairly low water year, but I think in general we can bet on at least 70, 72 degrees in general for the water temperature, so it's just perfect swing temperature. And with the warm summer days, especially in the late summer, it is very refreshing to jump into this water. It's a lot of fun. There are no dams upstream on the Salmon River. It's one of the last rivers in North America that does not have any dams on its entire length of any consequence. And other than little earthen dams somewhere way up in the headwaters, but this river that we see here is free flowing its entire length, and so we don't have the usual troubles that other rivers have with, for example, the Snake or the Grand Canyon, where you have the water controlled by a dam above you.
Trip leader Don Litton and the Dory guides scout one of the rockier rapids on the Salmon. During the normal summer season, the Salmon flows with a volume between 5,000 and 15,000 cubic feet per second. But in the late summer and early fall, lower water levels can make the going particularly rough for the hard hulls of dories. Even so, dories are highly maneuverable, and dory boatmen usually have little problems through the shallow stretches. By and large, the rapids of the Lower Salmon are relatively safe, with very few undercut rocks or steep drops. The average descent of the Lower Salmon is 10 feet per mile. The rocks are almost exclusively basalt from lava flows that have occurred over a time span of 25 million years. The Columbia Plateau is geologically unique. It is the largest exposed basalt surface on the face of the Earth, and the rocks are of the same relative hardness. For this reason, the Salmon River has a somewhat consistent rate of descent. But where resistance is found in the harder lava flows, there are rapids. The Salmon weaves its way in and out of several narrow canyons. Occasionally, a farm road will wind down the plateau slopes to a homestead by the river or to gold mine workings. But where the river enters the confines of the narrowest canyons, you float into the quiet isolation of true wilderness.
Salmon River has some of the nicest campsites you'll ever see on a river trip. Beautiful sandy beaches, beautiful warm temperate nights and days, and the camps are clean, and for the most part people still are very conscientious about the river and the canyon and taking care of it. So we find some of the nicest camping spots along this stretch of the river. and great places to camp, sandy beaches to swim and play, and it's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite rivers as far as camps go.
Many camps were also homesteads or old mine camps in the past.
There's been mining and homesteading, a lot of homesteading in the canyon here. Almost every creek we pass has had some type of a homestead on it at one time or another, especially in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and then again in the 30s during the Depression, when people needed to find some place where they could eke out a living, and most of them found that they could live pretty well in the canyon of the Salmon and the Snake Rivers. And so there's a number of places that will pass and some are still in operation, some are still there, that were originally homesteaded in the early 1900s. And they lived a pretty nice life down here, I must say. I think of course it was hard, and sometimes it was 2 days to the rodeo or to the dance out of town. They had to take a horse to town to go to the dance or the doctor or whatever. But they were used to that kind of lifestyle back then, and looking at it nowadays, it doesn't seem so bad. It seems like it was probably a pretty nice life they led. The trip itself lasts 5 days and 4 nights and covers a total of about 80 miles. And we go through a series of fairly open canyon country down to narrow slot canyons. And the first of these canyons is named Green Canyon. And then it opens up again into a fairly open countryside, and we get into another one called Cougar Canyon, No Hole Canyon. And at the tail end, where we meet with the Snake, at the confluence of the Snake, just prior to that, we will enter the last of the canyons, which is called Blue Canyon, which is a very beautiful stretch, a deep canyon with very sheer walls on either side.
The confluence with the Snake River brings with it some changes. The Snake River Canyon is larger, the water is colder, and the rapids are bigger. Like the Salmon, the Snake River Canyon has been home to both miners and homesteaders, and today it's a favorite destination of jet boats. Coon Hollow has become a walk-in museum of river life and the eccentricities of an old-timer, one of the Snake's most famous residents, the late Lloyd Moody. Though there are no roads to Coon Hollow, Lloyd Moody's old homestead continues to be one of the area's most popular attractions. The newspaper, mail, and provisions were delivered to Coon Hollow by mailboat.